Year 11. Welcome to your revision for John Scott's The Drum. In this poem, the poet John Scott is protesting against war and the lives lost, particularly when he says thoughtless youth. He uses two stanzas, as we can clearly see, as a juxtaposition. This juxtaposition shows us what young men think war will be like in stanza 1, and stanza 2 is the harsh reality of war, the death, the destruction and the misery. The first structural device John Scott uses is a dogmatic meter. The dogmatic meter adds a stress on every second syllable, and this adds a fierce energy to the beating of the drum. For instance, I hate that drums discordant sound. The syllables, obviously, and the stress on those syllables represent this constant beating of the drum, and the fact that John Scott can't seem to avoid the beating of the drum, which represents the recruiting of the soldiers and war in general. So next structural device is the use of two stanzas. The stanzas are of equal shape and equal length, and as discussed at the beginning, these represent the preconceptions of war, stanza 1, and the harsh reality of war in stanza 2. So basically, what the soldiers think war will be like, or the ideas they have about war in stanza 1, and unfortunately the reality of war in stanza 2, which is obviously this terrible act where people are killing each other, and in stanza 2 we see more emotion. If we begin our language of analysis, naturally we have to start with the repetition of I hate that drums discordant sound, parading round and round and round. Both stanzas start in that way. The repetition of these two lines, it represents the monotony of the sound of this constant beating of the drum that John Scott can't forget, and that inevitably represents death. You know, if there's a war going on besides the Cold War, it's inevitable that somebody will die. The idea that the sound is discordant suggests that the recruiting of men is everything that is wrong with war, that we shouldn't be trying, especially in those days, remember this was written in 1782, we shouldn't be trying to lure men into a war situation through false propaganda. The young men are described as thoughtless in line 3 because it's the idea that they don't understand the reality of war and join for the wrong reasons. And if we carry on, lures from cities and from fields to sell their liberty for charms of tawdry lace and glittering arms. It's the idea that the men join the war for idealistic reasons. The adjective of glittering arms there is positive. It almost makes the weapon sound like something to aspire to have. As we've said about stanza 1, it's this preconceived idea of war in the 1700s. You know, that it was a game and actually, you know, that nobody will be hurt and nobody will be injured. In line 7 we have ambition's voice commands, this use of personification. Again, it's this idea that the men want to be heroes, so that is what the ambition is, the ambition of, and the idea that if they join the war they're going to become heroes, when obviously the reality is actually they're not. They aren't going to be heroes at all. So again, it's this fanciful idea that when they join the war they will come out, you know, the end of the war being a hero. And we finish with a triple: to march and fight and fall in foreign lands, all the things that war consists of: the march, the fight and the fall. And when stanza 2 begins, as we said earlier, we see the realism of war. If we go straight, we've already discussed the first two lines. If we go straight to the imagery, the powerful emotive imagery that is used, it talks of, excuse me, sorry, that was an accident. To me, it talks of ravaged plains, burning towns, ruined swains, mangled limbs and dying groans. If you look at your adjectives here, the ravaged plain, the burning town, the ruined swain, the mangled limbs, the dying groans, it's very harsh imagery for the reader, and we realise the destruction that the war has caused. Not only has it ruined the geographical location of the town and the plains and things like that, it has physically ruined the men, mangled limbs and dying groans. It's very emotive there, so obviously playing on the reader's emotions and making us think exactly what John Scott thinks, that war is not worth it. And we finish with personification, and all that misery's hand bestows. Notice that's very similar to the personification in stanza 1, which was ambition. But if you notice, obviously, ambition here has turned into misery. Misery's hand bestows, a very chilling image of death there, and the idea that, you know, that death has almost decided that these soldiers should die. And then finally we have a metaphor to fill the catalogue of human woes. You know, the very idea of a catalogue, I know when I think of a catalogue, I think of something like an Argos catalogue, which is really big and really, you know, really detailed, really dense. So the idea that human woes, I hope you understand that woes there, you know, means our worries. The idea that we have a catalogue of worries after a war and during a war shows us that war is not pleasant. Yes, in stanza 1 it was presented almost in that way, but actually the harsh reality is that it's not. And what are human beings left with during the war and after the war is more worries and more sombre emotions and more sad emotions, which is obviously expressed in that metaphor.